After some hiatus, we are back with a brand new episode, and this time
special.
It's different. A little bit of a special episode.
Break World of Warcraft.
Read it in the title or not, we have some really cool guests today. You might have seen them in the Discords, on the Twitters, on the anything social media. One of the most constructive brains that we have had the pleasure of talking to. We're going to talk about WoW.
We're going to talk about WoW, and we're probably going to break WoW, but in the most constructive way possible. Constructive is going to be a very used word today, I feel like. But nevertheless, we have like Wowhead guide writers, class Discord theory crafters, mythic players, all of like the best of the best that we could possibly get into one call and just chat about World of Warcraft. What can be done about it? What's working? What's not working? I'll shut up. So we have Guiltyas, we have Mandl, we have Panthea, and we have Wordup. Now we're gonna let a little bit the boys to talk about themselves a little bit there, and then we're gonna just jump right into it. Okay, so starting off with Mr. Guiltyas, because I see him over there. Hey.
Obviously, anyone who's watched stuff before might recognize me. I'm Wowhead guide writer for Feral Druid. Yes, Feral Druid. I'm active on Twitter. I talk quite a lot about the game. So yeah, I'm passionate about WoW, passionate about Feral Druid, and happy to talk about shit here.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. Next up on the list, Mr. Mandl, a prominent figure.
Yep, same thing as Guilty, except that you can't see me, and I do Blood DK rather than Feral Druid. So, yeah, guide writer for Wowhead Icy Veins as well. And yeah, basically, if you go on Acheros, you'll probably see me.
Beautiful, beautiful. And next up on the list, Mr. Tag Notes himself. I did it again. Panthea.
I'm Mr. Tank Notes. I write Blood DK for Wowhead and Icy Veins. Also write Prop Paladin for Icy Veins. And I have my own site, Tank Notes. Should follow me on Twitter so I can get verified as well.
Yeah, we're going to have all the links.
That's what's up.
All the links in the description, by the way. And last but not least, the enhancement that never gave up, Mr. Wordup.
Yeah, I'm the melee criminal who continued to play enhancement when it probably shouldn't have been played. I do the same thing. I write Wowheads and Icy Veins guides for enhancement. I do Havoc and Feral stuff on there as well. And generally just play DPS. I'm a very big one-trick.
But wait.
Just that stuff. So
you support Arms Warriors?
Except arms, maybe.
What's wrong with arms? I like arms.
It's okay. No,
it was a Wind Fury joke.
I'm just a Wind Fury bot.
Well, it's gonna be bigger in 9.2 with the current tier sets, from what I've heard.
Well, I guess we'll talk about that at some point
eventually.
But now that we got everybody acquainted, I'm just gonna set it off like this, because we are talking about World of Warcraft in general. Systems, issues, good things, bad things. Possible solutions, looking towards the future, probably looking a little bit to the past. So, general World of Warcraft, very different than our major series right now. We were doing class specs, whatever. So. Just gonna throw this into you guys before we start looking at the issues and fixes. What is currently one of the best things World of Warcraft has going for it right now, in your opinions? Anybody can go in. Yeah, I know it's
Boomkins.
Shut up, man! Shut up. Honestly, the raiding content's still good. Like it's the only MMO in the business that does raiding content as well as raiding content does. I'm sure it's been slightly better in the past, but this tier wasn't too bad. There were obviously some glaring issues that I'm sure we'll end up talking about, but raids in this game are still pretty solid.
In terms of the time in the expansion right now, the fact that they've loosened all the Covenant stuff that should have been done on launch, the game's actually a lot more fun, basically. You can be whatever you want, whenever you want it, and it's great. Well, after you grind 40 renown.
The actual moment-to-moment gameplay that the game has is and always will be its biggest strength when it's actually used properly.
Yeah,
like there's no other game that legitimately does compete with how many different iterations of interacting with the game.
Yeah, for sure.
You have, and that's always what they really need to hone in on, because it is undeniably, when you look at other games, something that don't compete. Especially with the pace that WoW keeps.
In terms of that, the spec diversity and the identities of them, even though they've been, watered down quite a bit recently is still like there is no competitor there as well. There might be eventually, but well, we'll talk about the trend.
Yeah, it's very like you when you're playing X spec, you know that you're playing X spec, and it's very distinct, that experience compared to.
There's very few instances where you're like, you might as well be playing something else.
Yeah,
there are a couple, but for the most part,
I think the most flagrant one is Unholy Decay or Two-Handed Frost, one or the other. They've both a bit lost their identity over time.
I mean, we can go into it. Yeah, we can go into identity of specific specs and all, but I think like the major points are still there. I would just like to add that up until now, I don't think there's been out there an MMO that has quite the same feel when it comes to like the I don't know who said it, the interaction within the gameplay,
moment-to-moment gameplay.
Moment-to-moment gameplay. Yeah. That feel when you play a feral druid and you get that ferocious bite, and you can just almost get that sense of like nom, 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 you know what I mean?
It shows in PvE, but it shows even more in PvP as well.
You can tell how well it's done by how attached people are to like specific specializations.
Oh yeah,
and like the number of people from casual to hardcore that have a spec that is like the spec that they play. And I'm not specifically talking about myself, because I like playing like a lot of different things. But you can have people who like specifically their thing is they really like playing Fury Warrior, and they will always play it because of the way that it plays and it feels to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no matter how good or how bad it is.
I think
even zooming out from like spec interactions, I don't think any game has felt as snappy and responsive in terms of just pressing your buttons and having something happen.
Yes,
they've added
like something happened.
From the design, from the graphical design, sound design, and games design, they feel like they have this contrast that you can clearly, like guy said, that you can clearly see, oh, this is a Frost Mage, oh, this is a Prot Warrior. And I think one of the coolest thing that WoW has done over the course of 17 years, maybe, is that it created a personality that no other MMO has. I've tried dabbling into other MMOs, other RPGs, like there's something about WoW that always brings me back, and it's that person is like, oh, I like to play an orc, I want to see a dwarf, I want to, charge with a shield or something like that. Like it has its own identity, its own personality, its own fantasy, I feel like. So that's something that took a long time, but I feel like it's maybe what people resonate with.
Yeah, but no thanks to the current story. Hey, I'm not getting into that.
Are we starting?
No, we're not.
You have to remember as well, the biggest thing is like the volume of specs as well.
Yeah.
There is such a wide roster of how many things, and almost all of them are very distinct. And someone will be able to find something that gels with them, either how it looks, how it feels, or just the gameplay. They'll find something. That's something that is, generally speaking, quite rare in MMOs, because usually they have a quite small roster. There are other games that are getting close, but they usually keep to like, single-digit number of specs and so on.
We have 36 specs.
Even within the specs, like, take a look at Survival Hunter, for instance. There's two completely different builds that feel different to play. Same thing. Havoc Demon Hunter has 3 builds at the moment. And you can literally pick what resonates more.
Yeah. What would you guys say to this? There was, I think this trend started like probably 6 or 7 years ago. The whole tap targeting debate here. Now, some folks say that tap targeting is outdated. Others feel like this is like still the way to go in terms of like playing an MMO. Where do you guys stand on this? Since World of Warcraft, I feel, will never drop tap targeting, at least not in this iteration.
I don't even use tab targeting, so I'm probably not the best person to talk about this.
No, I'm not talking about selected targets with
targeting. I just stopped relying on it during Legion when they made it less predictive.
Right.
Because it got to the point where you just didn't know what it would target next, and just completely kills the usability of it.
Yeah, I'm not talking about selecting your targets with tab. Just the combat where you have a target selected and making sure you hit.
If you're like inferring that like the alternative is what, like telegraph
shots.
targeting, like say
skill shot
Wildstar
telegraph.
did.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that would function with the way that WoW's gameplay operates.
Yeah,
Personally,
agreed.
it would never.
Yeah.
It's not conducive
take a lot
to
of
the way that
rebuilding.
the way that the game feels and plays. And they haven't. They've been more loose with having abilities that don't specifically need a target as well to mix up the gameplay. But the core of you target something, that's the thing that you're going to cast on, is like a really integral part. The game works on, and I don't think it could ever go.
Yeah. There's a load of specs that just wouldn't function if like you hit everything that was in front of you, where you only hit like a narrow range.
It might work with some. Like for instance, from
I
the
think
way
there's some
Fury
that probably
Warrior
work,
works,
but-
I would expect Fury to work like this.
I mean, Fury does kind of almost work like that already with stuff like Cleave and
Yeah. No, I just meant going whole hog on it. Like everything cleaves.
True.
I think in terms of like feel, I don't know if you could have some specs that function that way wholeheartedly and some specs that didn't. It's kind of just
Yeah.
I think having
like
they
a PvP MMO.
yeah,
where there's a lot more skill
Yes.
expression involved as part of the core gameplay.
in terms of movement and stuff. Yeah.
I think a healthy mix of having, because there are abilities that are just free fire or they'll self-target, things like Convoke, like Crash Lightning, Whirlwind. Those things are nice to have, but it shouldn't be the core basis that everything works on.
Mhm.
They're nice to mix up, but the core needs some control, and that's something that players like to have at least a bit of, especially in their primary ability tools. That I can't see that going. And I don't think it would be good for the game either, personally.
Is this when we bring up Mistweavers?
We can. I mean,
We can bring up how like 90% of mystery healing is smart healing.
Yeah. Yeah, but in a way, it's a great success and a great failure at the same time. Because on one end, it's amazing that you can do this much with smart healing. On the other hand, it just disengages the player.
Yes. I mean, yeah.
But I think part of that is that the space of design for healers, I would argue, is one of the harder ones to create different gameplay feeling between specs. And so that they explored the option, and that's the spec that happens to go down that route, is totally fine for the people who want that type of gameplay. And if you don't want it, then you don't have to play it. And you have
there's definitely
lots
a
of
case
different
of like,
options.
yeah. If you don't like it, play something else, right? Like there's so many specs that it does kind of annoy me sometimes because I feel like they are kind of moving away from that a little bit with some specs. I wish they'd enforce that more. Not every spec.
Yeah, I think that's like going back to the very first point, like with the strength of the game, that is something that they shouldn't be afraid of just owning and just.
It doesn't matter if there's only like 2% of the population that enjoys that spec, right? Like, if those people are like dedicated to that spec and they enjoy that spec, then why try and make it something that already exists?
Yeah, exactly. If you don't like it, then there is probably something that you do like, and you're more than welcome.
As long
to play
as
that.
the ability to cross over to a different spec is not too high, which it was way too high at the start of Shadowlands.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. Yeah, that they have
fully agreed.
Done.
So basically, one of their biggest strengths is actually contained within the specs and their identity and the way they feel and stuff like that. Do you guys feel like they actually capitalized on this the best in Legion? Feels like they kind of addressed part of this in Legion. Legion felt, at least at the surface, an expansion who was primarily focused on class identity, and there was a lot put into there. I don't know if you guys agree or anything, but
you need to remove like 3 or 4 different outliers and only consider the end of Legion, and I agree.
Right. Oh.
So, like, for instance, you nuke Blood Decay out of the equation because, well, Mythic Plus.
Yeah.
And you also nuke a couple of other specs that were basically overwhelmingly strong or just completely broken.
I think that you could probably say that it's not just Legion. There was like a block of about 6 years where they had, like from Mists through to the tail end of Legion, they had a pretty, although things fluctuated, pretty reasonable series of iterations of different specs that were very much crystallized by the tail end of each expansion into what they were good at. or how they played, and they had a really good loop, and anyone could find something that they hooked into.
Yeah. I think for most DPS, like the glory age in terms of like design was MOP, and there were some that kind of peaked in WOD, some that kind of peaked in Legion. And like tanks and healers, I think were more WOD and Legion based, but that sort of block was definitely in terms of
tanks were weird in MOP because of Vengeance. Like Vengeance tainted the entire picture.
I think WOD was a much better period for tanks in particular than MOP was. But I think pretty much every spec you can take and you can fit it somewhere in those series, and it's probably its peak.
Yep.
Which to be fair is like half the game's life, so maybe I'm being a bit generous here, but
well, I think those were the 3 expansions where it was significantly more clear that it was a kind of no spec left behind era, where they were actually operating on a system of if something is underdeveloped or not getting attention or anything like that, it will be worked on, and someone will look at it.
This stopped at the start of Legion, actually. I think the last big rework was Assassination Rogue during Nighthold.
Affliction also had one in the same period.
Feral had a mid-tier in Tomb of Sargeras as well.
Yeah, and Tomb had enhancement in...
and then Feral had another one in Uldir.
And I think Antaurus was probably like a case of the end of the expansion raids generally, which I think is fair, kind of a hands-off approach of where we are now is where it's going to be until next expansion. And as much as it's frustrating to be in that position when you are in it, as I have been in the past, you can understand it's time to start working on the next one and take it a bit more seriously.
As long as it's not too broken at the end, it's completely fine. Like,
I mean, honestly, I'm okay if it is completely broken at the end, as long as it's not like excluding things. Like, look at HFC. HFC was one of the most fun periods of like end of expansion raiding I've ever had, and it was just arcane mages one-shotting things. I don't think I've ever had as much fun end of tier raiding as killing bosses in like 50 seconds.
Bearing in mind as well,
as low as possible.
Hellfire had
you mean 15? Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get quite that low, unfortunately.
Bearing in mind, Hellfire also had the infamous "we just don't want you to play demonology," and yet people still play demo. So even in a period where they were going out of the way
actively tried to kill a spec,
say we aren't going to be working on it, and if it's not that good, then deal with it. People were still willing to play it because it still was functional.
It was still good on stuff as well. Like it still had a niche.
I'd rather have that than a silent gentleman's agreement like what we had in BFA about Survival Hunter. Where, like, there's some kind of pretend argument for, well, here's a 4% aura buff. You're like, that fixes nothing.
Yeah, I mean, they got a lot of shit for that, but yeah, I would rather they were just like, yeah, we're working on this. If it sucks, unlucky. I'd rather have that communication.
Absolutely.
Like, so many sins are fixed just by talking to us.
Yeah,
I think
if you give the message
the aura buff is a big thing to pin it on this, because I think when that came in to be a bit technical, when they started leaning on that more, and this is probably quite harsh to them, but once that came in and started being the de facto way that we're going to deal with specs, that was when the downturn happened on class design balance.
This happened in BFA, right? When they started tuning auras, different auras.
The auras came in Legion, but they didn't fully rely on them until BFA. And in BFA, the amount of times that it was just, okay, there's a problem with the spec, we'll give them 5% on the aura, job done. And then the same problems that it had with this button's not worth pressing, blah, 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 that lots of specs had, just continues, or it's delayed by 3 months and then it comes back.
Yeah.
And then you had abominations of specs, which had like minus 49% auras, huh?
yeah, I know about that
one. And the worst part about all this is, like, if the devs actually came out and said, look, we're going to fix it, just not now, kind of thing. A bit like what they did to demo, but with a better message, people would be providing feedback on how to fix it.
But there was Elemental Shaman rework, which ended up being an aura buff.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was like...
Or worse, when they give you communication and they just completely lie about it. Like, it was Mistweavers, wasn't it, who were told that they were going to get they were going to get some certain spell back, and then they just never talked about it ever again. Didn't add it, just completely moved on.
The other thing as well with the aura buff system, especially when patch notes come out and so on, is it makes it really hard for the average player who's just, playing each day and then they check the patch notes and so on to actually parse what's changed.
Yep.
Oh, God, yeah.
Especially considering that it doesn't affect everything. It only affects your core abilities.
That's even worse, yeah. That's the other thing that it dovetails into, that the black box of what scales with what is allowed to scale, and so on, becomes something that you have to go and ask very specific people, or go and search in spell data and so on.
Yep.
To the point where people disconnect and they just don't care. And going that far to just confuse people isn't a good way to engage them.
Yeah, especially when you have some stuff that just doesn't make sense and never gets fixed. Like out of the Death Knight Covenant abilities, for I think it's Unholy, where 3 of the 4 Covenant abilities are in the spec aura, and the 4th one just isn't.
That's interesting.
It extends as well to trinkets once they pull them out. Any normal person who goes and looks at an item and they go, well, I've got mastery that increases shadow damage, and this trinket does shadow damage, so it should, right? And they'll come and ask, and the amount of times that someone will come into a Discord or DM me and ask, does this scale with X? And you go, this one just so happens to not.
Yeah.
That's
Allow
really
listing...
difficult to actually convey.
Allow listing class
on the
spells
other
was
hand,
the biggest mistake they've made, unironically.
On the other hand, you have the cases like Fire Mage, where they have a conduit that just buffs fire damage flat out.
Yep.
And you go into Castle Nathria, you get Dreadfire Vessel, it's fire damage. Great.
That one also, in particular, is quite egregious, because up until then, you could have got to the point through BFA of just saying, no trinket scale with anything, all of the spec stuff, it doesn't work with it. That's just how it works. And then when you have an outlier, it poisons the well of everyone thinking, well, that one worked with this thing, right? So maybe this one does.
Yeah.
And in the grand scope of things, talking about BFA and Legion and all of that, how do you guys think this all transpires right now in Shadowlands when it comes to class balance, more or less? I mean, clearly we have the outliers here and there. At least looking from a very general perspective, it seems like class balance is better and now than it was in BFA, and it feels like in BFA it was a little bit all over the place. Although going further back in time, you guys might be able to clarify this a little bit more. But after all these years, what do you guys think of how all of the class design, this balance and everything functions right now in Shadowlands? In, let's say 9.1.5. Who knows what we're going to have in 9.2? But
at the moment, I think it's better than it was in Season 1 of Shadowlands. But I think it's the second lowest it's been, at least in my opinion.
I think I would go, in this situation, with the way that you framed the question, I might be putting my neck out here to say this, but I think that, earnestly speaking, specs were more balanced in the middle of BFA, not accounting for corruption.
I think there's a lot of periods where specs were more balanced.
Really?
Because the way that the balance problem right now is manifesting in Shadowlands is that it looks, on the surface, if you look at statistics, looks quite flat, and that lots of specs they have room to be taken. They're not awful, and you can generally play anything. But under the hood of it, there are some extreme winners and losers where one spec might be playable, but effectively it's a second class spec. You don't want to take it, or you shouldn't want to take it if you want to interact with the fights that they've designed.
Yep. On one end you have specs with no burst. On the other end you have specs where their entire 3-minute burst is in a 20-second window. And they do the same average damage. In once you average it over the entire fight, they do roughly the same amount of damage. But one of them allows you to delete mechanics and the other one doesn't.
I think
I'm
talking about
not even
yeah.
It's not the name of these specs.
And then you have other things like Windwalker that exists that I don't think right now is in a healthy design space, but having one lets you say, well, we don't need anyone else to AoE, we've just got this, and that's going to cover any AoE needs that we need. So everyone else can just do what they want.
It's especially due to design issues in encounters and one of their Covenant abilities, because it echoes damage and amplifies it. And well, we had Soul Render this tier, where basically it just tripled or quadrupled dipped, and
I don't know if I really think it is.
Presses 2 buttons and boom.
I don't know if I really think it is encounter-related issues. I think encounters are being broken by specs being broken and unhealthy, as opposed to the encounters being bad. Like if the specs were healthy and were reasonable, then the encounter changes would be fine.
Yeah,
but
true.
Having an encounter that you can like hyper specialize in, and you do Soul Render, then you want a Windwalker, right? They're really good for that. It's totally okay to have like a fight that they just specialize in. It's when that their entire identity is that they're the one that just breaks the fight, and you need one.
Yeah, exactly.
And once you've got one, then everyone else, it doesn't matter what the hell they do. No one cares. You just bring that guy, and they just like patchwork the boss.
It just brings back the entire 8.1, 8.2 Holy Paladin back to the menu, basically. Because that was the same thing, just on a healer.
Yeah. It's not fun for the Windwalker. It's not fun for the other people playing. It's just. I think the word up used was really good. It's not healthy design.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
which is the real issue. I don't think it is particularly well balanced. If you look at average statistics, it is. Well, it's not far off. But when you look at higher end statistics, it all gets really blown out of place. And it's not healthy as well. So it's poorly balanced and unhealthy.
I think where Shadowlands has ended up now is that most specs have ended up being very hyper focused in a specific niche, except for like a handful of specs where they can just do everything, or they can do way more than the average spec can do. They can interact with different fight or damage profiles. And the last time that niches were the thing that they focused on was WoD. And I would say that the extent of how niched certain specs have become is orders of magnitude worse in the wrong direction in Shadowlands than it ever was in WoD.
Echoing that to an extent as well, like at the moment we have niches that we have specs that are supposed to be good at a niche that are just not as good as, for instance, a Boomy.
Oh boy.
Like it's not Boomy hatred. It's just that they're in a situation where they can do everything at the touch of a button.
And it doesn't really seem fair.
So from where I'm standing, though, what I'm understanding is that their focus on on creating these super hyper niches for specs has developed into these, weird game design where, like you said, the specs are just deleting mechanics, even though there can be two that do the same overall damage. With one you can skip something, with another you don't. And from what I understand from you guys, that you think that the problem is with the design of the spec itself. Do you think they should homogenize or dial back this hyper focus on niching, or what exactly could solve at least this problem? Or is it just an encounter design issue where mechanics have to be deleted?
So it's a bit of both, really. So in terms of the spec type specializing, that to me is a good thing, because it does give the player satisfaction of, you get clear visible results as to executing your spec in an optimal way. But the kind of levels of this is your damage peak. So using a Venfir Moonkin example, you've got a good 20-30 second period where you're doing 40-50k DPS. And then you go down to doing tank level DPS for 2 minutes. That's absolutely terrible for the Moonkin player. Because if you get messed over during that burst period, you get given a mechanic. So if you're doing Kel'Thuzad and for some reason you used your cooldowns before the silence circles came out, like a noob, and then you get silenced, then you've just lost all your damage. And then you've got 2 minutes of doing nothing. It's an awful feeling for the player.
I agree that it is a mix of the two, predominantly because when you have specs that hyper focus on one thing, and this applies to tank, healer, and DPS, if you're hyper focused, this is the boss that you are really good at, is one that effectively isn't very difficult anyway in the tier, and then later on you aren't useful that doesn't feel good either. So say, like, hypothetically, if we weren't in a world where Arms was really good at basically everything, and they were only just really good at 2 targets, and then you go, well, okay, they're excellent on the 9, and then everywhere else, you don't really care whether you have one or not. That feels really bad, because that's a boss that no one cares about. It doesn't matter if your niche shows up on a boss that's a throwaway. It only matters if it shows up on the boss that's important. So if your niche is really good on Painsmith or Sylvanas or whatever, then you are infinitely more valuable than anyone else, because those are the bosses that actually have checks.
True.
How much do you think... obviously, this might play a little bit more into the design of the class rather than the design of the encounters, although I wouldn't be surprised if their encounter design was designed around this. But how much do you think like external power has influenced this trend?
Oh, we're getting there.
And I'm talking about obviously there are some that are okay that keep expansions fresh and that, whoa, this is different from the past one because we got this thing. But I think we can all agree that it's a little bit too much right now, where we have legendaries, where we have covenants and covenants abilities and soulbinds, and then conduits, and it's layer on top of layer on top of layer. Then we can probably talk about the subject overall.
Borrowed power? Do you think it's a worthy subject?
I guess borrowed power. I didn't really want to say borrowed power because it felt a little bit too vague, and maybe it didn't do justice to the entire.
I have a small rant about borrowed power. So.
I mean, like, borrowed power to an extent is good. Like,
I agree.
There is a margin where it is actually healthy for the game. The problem is that we are both way past that threshold, and also most of it is passive. Like, Shards of Domination, best example. Like, you don't interact with them.
I strongly agree that you need some, I think.
Yes, I mean, borrowed power, tier sets are borrowed power.
An expansion, having it is totally fine, like a bit of it.
Yep.
The thing is that what seems to have happened in particular in Shadowlands, but it definitely started in BFA, is that the core things that you can switch up and change, in particular things like talents, which are baseline identity of the spec, get neglected in lieu of focusing on the borrowed power part, when really it should be the core that comes first always, and the borrowed power, that's the icing on the cake.
Yeah, exactly.
Gets even worse when it gets recycled across expansions. Like, take Azerite for, again, it's going to be a survival example. There were 5 very good Azerite traits. 4 of them ended up being legendaries, so effectively you lost 3 of them. It feels garbage.
BFA had quite a few examples of, this talent, it's awful, but we're going to fix it. But we're going to fix it by changing the Azerite power, not the talent. And that is the wrong way around.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly, yeah. Classes are like being built around the borrowed power as opposed to the borrowed power being built around classes. So it can like shift off of feeling like you're playing, like, let's be real, Boomkins aren't really playing Boomkin, they're playing Panthea.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They wanted.
It's so warping.
Didn't Ian wanted that? You're not a Boomkin, you're a Ventier Boomkin. I think he said that in the
right, but it's not right specific to Boomkin.
I know.
He's not even a Ventier Boomkin, he's a Ventier.
Yeah, exactly.
just a Ventier.
If it was like spec specific and it was like, this is the Boomkin power, then cool. Like, it's different. You get something different if you try a different spec. But it's so powerful that it's warping it to the point that you're not really playing Venthyr Boomkin, you're just playing the Venthyr class ability. It strips so much out of the actual base class.
As well, when you have them that warping, and you can say that you are a Venthyr Moonkin, but then would anyone ever say I'm a Necrolord Moonkin and have any identity toward that at all?
Quite.
Is there anything that like drags you to it? No, not really.
Because nobody plays them.
Excuse me, 7-dimensional chess around bouncing the thing to the right target.
Shut up.
Like the operative word in all of this borrow power stuff should always be the spec's name. It shouldn't ever be the borrow power. Like I'm not playing like a primer enhancement shaman. I'm playing an enhancement shaman that has primal primer from BFA as an example. That's the thing that should be like 1,000,000% the focus, and always should be.
With enhancement specifically, they almost had this at the end of Legion, where you had legendary combinations that really made the spec and just took it to the next level in a way that you, like, you could play the casino build, like the the random ascendance proc stuff, and then you play Fury of Air, and you would play around it, or you could play the entire Lavalash double legendary thing, and it defined what you were playing, but not to the level where it was the legendaries talking.
I would bring up, and this is going to be very specific and slightly anecdotal, is I'm bothered by when they almost get it right and then pull back on it. And the best example of this that I've brought up so many times at this point is the first week of Battle of Dazar'alor. Enhancement had 3 Azerite traits that let you pick any talent on the tree. And I mean, every single DPS option was viable in some way in a different build path. And there was 3 different builds. And all 3 of them were about equal, and they were better at different things. So you could play all of them, which I think is the peak possible design that you could get for any class.
Best, yeah.
And they decided, in their infinite wisdom, that 2 of them, because they were basically hanging off the Azerite power, which is part of the problem, to effectively kill 2 of them, and those talents were never ever picked again. They were dead in the water. And I think that is an incredible shame that wasn't capitalized on and extended past to other specs.
Maybe do you think like the decisions they made during these years in terms of like borrowed power and almost capitalizing on their strength in terms of like specs and class and how they feel, do you think it has a lot to do with the fact that they kind of, at least up until recently, never really talked to the player base? And more specifically... Go ahead, man.
No. It's easier to make something new and different by removing the entire thing every expansion.
I also think it's kind of a myth. They did talk to the player base. They just didn't listen or take advice.
So, kind of, yeah.
The whole narrative that they never listen, they never converse with anyone or anything. They do. They just don't necessarily act on it. Or I think more accurately, I don't think they expect the level or the volume of things said negatively and the amount of work that will be needed to bring it up to scratch to come in when it does. And I think that sometimes causes them to disengage and just hyper-focus on one build. This is the thing. So as long as it's functional, at least someone will play it.
The discussion quite frequently is also around how can we accomplish this with the fewest possible changes?
Yeah.
Which isn't the good way of doing it. It's the easy way of doing it, but it just causes you more issues in the long run.
At the same time, they go completely like. I get the impression that they're just like Wordup, they disengage because they see all the things that are just needing changes and none of the good parts. But just applying just basic Pareto principle would actually solve it. Focus on the core issues. Like, for instance, Enhancement has no hooker and flame shock at the moment. Focus on that, fix that, then move on to the next thing. Yes. It's also that they're critically afraid of upsetting the, however they want to call it, meta. And we saw this with a blue post during Castle Nathria, where they were basically unwilling or like just not necessarily keen on making changes, like fundamental changes to specs that would affect the balance. It was in PvP. But it also likely applies in PvE. And on one end, I completely agree. Like, suppose you play Panthea Boomy, suddenly you take a complete rework halfway through the tier, and your character is basically no longer good at what it does. What do you do then? It sucks for the player, but they don't take advantage of the patches to do that either.
I think that extends as well to when a niche crystallizes that they don't necessarily expect or isn't the one that they were gunning for originally. They're very afraid to upset that because that's effectively the only hook that people have to want to be playing it. So like Prop Paladin is a good example. They crystallize as their spec does a lot of damage as a tank. They do more than other people, and that's it. So we don't want to upset the status quo because that is the thing that people are playing it for. So let's not change that. Let's leave that and be the thing that's what it does. The same happened with healers in basically all of BFA, where he goes, well, people are taking Holy Paladins and Disc Priests to everything because they're the ones that bring DR. We can't upset that. And then if you're one of the specs that don't have that and that's the thing that you need, then you're, for lack of a better word, you're up shit creek. You've just got to deal with it.
They've got to sort that out. They can't leave it as it is and just leave specs languishing like they do now. It's,
I think it's been...
Especially across patches.
Yes.
Because, like, one patch is bad enough, but, yeah, I mean, Frostmage has been creeping under the radar. Boomkin has been way over the radar and not changed.
I don't think anyone would be mad if their spec was, like, really good one patch, then kind of just okay the next patch.
Yeah.
As opposed to having some specs that are good the entire expansion and some specs that are mediocre for the entire expansion. If it was properly cyclical, then...
And I think that the big thing is that what happens every expansion is if you're bad at launch, for especially the last two expansions now, if you're bad at launch, then I'm sorry, you just lost the dice roll. We'll see you next expansion and you can get another chance. And
it's not even a dice roll, really. It's a fucking weighted dice roll. Let's be real.
You basically have to you have to pray that when beta ends, you end up being left at the point where you're strong enough, or you have something that makes you really good, and then you're going to have a great expansion. It's going to be fun the whole way through. Good job, you. It's awesome. But other than that, if that doesn't happen, you effectively resign yourself to knowing, well, the next 2 years are going to be pretty rocky, and I don't expect that anything's going to change. So strap yourself in.
Yeah.
Basically, you could have put all of what Wordup just said into BA Mage, Warlock, Boomkin, Hunter. Pick one of those four.
Hunter's on the way down at the moment. Like, it's going back up thanks to the tier sets, but like MM had a sort of niche. But like survival has been dead in the water for years now. BM got completely obliterated at the end of BFA, rightfully so, by the way.
Yeah, you have to pray that you walk the line as well. The thing that you want, that makes people want you, is not so egregious that it will get immediately nerfed. Like, rogues are a good example. For
you don't want to be
BFA.
number one. You want to be number like 2 or 3.
Yeah, you want to like ride the line of not being quite overpowered, and really noticeable, but everyone knows secretly you're really, really good. So like Sub in BFA, really good example. That flew too close to the sun, was really overpowered. Everyone saw it, and then it got deleted off the face of the earth. Then Rogues had a miserable time.
I'd argue that they fulfilled their class identity. They were so subtle, you never saw them anymore.
That was actually a crime for subtlety, Rogues. But I do want to put like a little bit more controversial topic, because from an average player's perspective, when looking I'm talking about myself here. When looking at patch notes and class changes all throughout BFA and through the beta, alpha, beta, Shadowlands, and then going into, I couldn't help but notice that obviously, like you guys said, they don't want to upset the status quo, but certain specs are just like blatantly overlooked. I'm talking about stuff like Frost, Death Knights, Survival as well, Feral as well, and I would say Red, but I guess Red got a bunch of new things and new tools in
probably enhancement, but I'm not
enhancement
sure.
The thing is,
it's so overlooked that you just forgot about it.
Enhancement. Crusaded for 6 months to fix survival between BFA and Shadowlands. I don't know what you're talking about.
Like I'm talking about survival enhancement as well, going from Nathria and here where you have a lot of buffs to elemental and pretty much nothing on enhancement as well, and Frost Decay having almost the same talents for like 2, maybe 3 expansions now, but Fire Mages, Boomkins, Shadow Priests constantly getting new things almost every patch and every half patch. Do you guys think that this is still going into the not upsetting the status quo? Do you think that maybe they don't have the I don't want to say talent, but manpower to handle these specs as well,
is
or people actually playing it?
Manpower? I always wondered.
It's just not enough developers.
And passion of those players playing it, because you got a larger pool, you get more feedback. You're able to iterate on the larger pool of feedback. But with the more kind of niche specs, it's people that are kind of ride or die. I like to play it this way.
There are also some specs which just have blatant favoritism. Like they have a Blizzard employee who cares a fuck ton about that spec, and he pushes for things. That does happen.
Boomkin?
What? But I do think they have
Havoc was a good example.
I think Frost is a really good example that you brought up. Like Frost DK, I get the feeling that the reason that this keeps happening with specifically Frost is there are people who really, really like playing with breath, and there are people who really, really don't like playing with breath. So you can't go all in the direction of, right, okay, that's it. The definition of the spec is that you're playing breath, because you're going to upset a chunk of the player base. So you have to ride the line between the two of them, because you're afraid of upsetting one portion.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that is actually, like, there's been cases in the past where they've actually managed to have this, to have a spec have two different playstyles. Like Frost is even crazier at the moment because they can equip 200 or 100 weapons, and that just complicates things even further. But beyond that, like, I was thinking Legion Shadow Priest, where the way Insanity and Void Form worked back then tied in really well with Surrender to Madness as a talent, at least in 7.0. And to an extent, that was, like, it wasn't healthy in that it wasn't developed enough, but it could have been. It's the same thing with 7.0 Discipline. It was a good idea, it needed more iteration, but it got thrown out in 7.1 instead.
I think that if you had developed, I don't want to lay this like at the feet of them. If you had developed a wider development core and people who were specialized in specifically handling a spec, then you would have more room to have specs have multiple playstyles balanced. But if it's going to be the case where there's not that many people around, I don't think that it's feasible to actually maintain multiple playstyles for specs. You have to just bite the bullet and own it. This is the way that the spec plays. As unhealthy and unpleasant as that generally is, I think that that's the only way that you fix this, unless you up the quantity of people working and specializing on the specs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Going to complaining about developers not looking at specs more than enough, but really they do need more people looking at it because it is the core of the game. Like,
it's
all the work that's put into
the absolute magnum opus of the game. That is the primary like method of delivery and engagement with everything that happens in the game, and it always will be.
Yeah, you don't play your Covenant, you don't play your trinkets, you play your character and your spec.
Yeah,
if that feels garbage, everything else is garbage.
And it's sorely neglected in terms of ongoing development at the moment.
I'll repeat the same sentiment that I had in BFA in another podcast, which is that if you can release any amount of content, no matter what it is, you can have like 50 raids in an expansion, but if the spec that you're playing or the classes that you're interacting with it are bad or unfun, then it doesn't matter. No one's going to care. No one's going to remember it. No one's going to want to log in and do it. When you look at WoD was absolutely bereft of content, but the classes were really fun. So people went out of their way to level another class, another spec.
True.
And play Hellfire again for like the 7th, 8th time in the week because they were fun and you just wanted to play the spec. You didn't necessarily play the raid, and that's always going to be something that they should remember.
Yep. I had like 3 ferals in fucking HFC.
Hey!
It was, I played so much feral in that expansion. But if specs aren't, if they don't put enough effort into specs, then everything else also gets dragged down. It's just the reality of how a game like this works.
We're going to see that next week when the Mage Tower comes up.
Oh, God. That's going to be so rough.
Yeah,
people are going to realize how much of their specs are fucking the Covenant they're playing, and it's going to be a mess.
That's actually
all 4
interesting.
Of us have done PTR testing for the Mage Tower, and we've probably all seen the same thing. The classes feel completely anemic without the borrowed power.
That's
because yeah, but it's not even like the DPS is whatever. Like Frost, I was mentioning earlier, like you have Frost DK, you lose Everfrost, and you're like, well, okay, I'm a builder spender now. I press obliterate and I spend the runic power. Great. And it's going to be like that. Like every single player is going to discover this, like their spec, without the elements that Shadowlands brings. And that's going to feel awful for everybody.
Yeah. It's close to as extreme as it was going from Legion to BFA in terms of just losing artifact ability.
Not only that as well, if you actually did the Mage Tower when it was current content as well, your memory is going to be of what the spec was like in Legion, where
absolutely.
it had borrowed power as well of its own type. And when you go in there, you're going to realize, this really is missing a lot of stuff. And in some cases, specs have been reworked between then, but the challenges haven't been. So you don't even have the tools to deal with some of the challenges that they're putting at your feet.
They had
a proper moment of truth.
Ultimate opportunity to take back all the spells as they were in Legion and just casually just aura all of them so that you're basically playing your old spec. They could have done this because everything is still available in some way or other. Like, just basically put all the artifact traits as passives and everything. Like, sure, it would be a bodge job, but it would be such a cool experiment as opposed to this, let's disable all the things.
I think some specs that might just not have worked for because they've changed them so much since then. But they for sure should have all the like little passives on the artifact tree that like affected your utility shit, because that's what really stuck out to me the most when I was doing it. Is I remember when I was doing Mage Tower back in Legion, there was a cool trick. Feral had an artifact passive whereby your bleeds didn't break your roots. Yep. So the way you played it is you put bleeds on these ads and you rooted them. And you just left them rooted, you let the bleeds stick down. That doesn't exist anymore.
so now you have to deal with the shield dims the hard way.
So it's shit like that.
Other really good one is Xylem for Havoc. The way that was tuned for Havoc was it was tuned around the fact that Soul Rending was 100% leech. So you were immortal when you were in meta. So whenever you were taking a lot of damage, just when in meta, you were fine. Soul Rending is now 10 to 20% leech. So when that damage comes in,
good luck.
You do not out-heal it. It really hurts. And that is a really obvious oversight that exists there. The specs just don't function to deal with it.
It's a proper moment of truth, I would say, for a lot of players. I feel, as Mandl said it, I think Guiltyas too. This will be the time where people who will actually engage with this will see how much this external power, borrowed, whatever, has gone, how far it has gone, because you're basically playing a shallow of a spec, more or less. It's going to be interesting, and maybe, I don't know if it's going to be a blessing in disguise, but maybe a wake-up call for them. I don't know.
I'm actually thinking of that because I remember doing I did on the PTR, the Mage Tower, the same ones that I've done on Legion, and it was so glaring, the issues that I just didn't have tools. Like, it's one thing to, I'm taking more damage or doing more damage or stuff like that, or I just don't have the physical tool, the utility, and it just goes to show how much they've catered the encounter around the external powers, obviously in Legion and so on, going all through all the expansions, and how much that hurts and what the spec actually is beneath all of this. And I really hope that this is, like you said, the blessing in disguise, and hopefully we can see some changes in 10.0, because
maybe
there's still
even 9.2, because I was really curious to see what the boys think on looking and also on the subject matter of external power, right? Looking at 9.2, there's tier sets obviously, but conduits, I mean, it's a renowned 80, there's no more conduits, we still have that, and basically the two legendaries. Do you feel this is a sign that, okay, enough is enough? Or is it just, okay,
No.
there's still tier sets?
Oh god, no, it's going to be fucked.
It's doubling down on the wrong things, because, like, for instance, the Covenant legendaries, they put them out there. They basically did not listen to any of the feedback, and they did not tune them properly. So you have cases like Panthea Boom, where the legendary is literally 10 times stronger than all the others, except now they don't even have to choose it.
And then you've got like Necrolord for Druid, which is like 0% ST increase. So that Covenant, which is like primarily single target focused, it's like just dead across the board for everything, unless they change the legendary.
DPS losses as well.
Yeah, it's a mess.
I think
being a legendary makes it a DPS loss, but somehow it does. So
the double legendaries were always a problem, because it felt like when I saw them coming out like week on week during that patch, come 9.1, it seemed like some of them were obviously someone has gone in and they've designed something, and that's going to be something that works with the spec.
Yeah.
Whereas others, it felt like, well, we've got to have one for the Covenant because otherwise the whole system doesn't work. So I don't know, like just grab something and chuck it on, and we won't tune it, and no one cares. And there's some like
CD forehead.
really egregious examples with some of them. Like you look at enhancement is obviously the one that I default to, but like Necrolord for Shaman, that is a non-power, completely irrelevant, never been tuned, never going to be used. It's awful. So that kills the Covenant because now it's not something that's like it's an option that I can ignore. It's mandatory. If you want to play Necrolord, you've got to play with that. Panthea and for Shaman is the same thing, except that one's even worse in the same way that the Priest Night Fae legendary is, where it doesn't even have tuning knobs that you can up or down. It's a one and done fire and forget effect, and that is even worse.
So basically, what we're kind of expecting from 9.2 will be an absolute shit show all over the place.
We haven't even gotten started on tier sets, and the fact they're going to be applicable in M+ PvP and raids.
that was interesting to see.
I would hope, in like, if there's one thing, as much as I think the most important thing is that they need to seriously address some class design things, I would really hope that they go back and look at the Covenant legendaries that they neglected even touching as a primary concern now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also modeled as well by the data. Like, look at Kyrian Death Knight. The legendary itself is supposed to be 0 value on single target. But you can exploit a bug to actually have it gain mad value in single target. Neither the bug nor the original behavior have been fixed. It's been, what, a month and a half? 2 months?
Reveal the bug.
Mandl's revealed it everywhere, I'm pretty sure.
I mean, at this point, it's pretty much common knowledge. The only thing that probably isn't is which toy is required.
And like,
Now you've told them there's a toy.
with tier sets, like poisoning the well with that as well, is that the whole tier set situation right now is that some have been designed to just work with the spec. They make the spec better. Whereas others have been designed where they like hyper focus on what they're good at already and make them better at it. So now they're even more specialized in one direction.
Yeah.
So they're going to dominate that direction even more. And then you've got others where they hyper focus on the weakness, but that means they're going to go down versus the ones that get the hyper specialized things, and they're going to be acceptable in the thing that we're weak at. So they all go in weird directions, and there's no parity there.
Yeah, like Feral is like a burst AoE thing. It's not a good burst AoE thing. It's not going to suddenly make you beat Windwalker Monk. Windwalker Monks are still going to do more pressing one fucking spinning crane kick than you do pressing your 3-minute cooldown. But it's also like almost meaningless on single target.
Are you ready to get your... Is it 2-piece or 4-piece that does the burst AoE damage and have it a BFA split instead for balance?
Please don't make that happen, man. I've been so hopeful and so optimistic about it. In reality, it's not going to scale with anything. It's going to fucking suck.
For the audience, the BFA split is when you have a spell that does X% AP damage, but splits between nearby targets, but also gains 15% per target hit, up to 5.
It's
But
I
it
don't
does
think we'll be able to do that.
It does like X40 damage from your mastery, right? So it'll do like...
I can't, because he'll make another video about me.
Yeah,
so.
never mind. Just imagine. I think the thing is, there's no actual problem with having hyper-focused set bonuses, because they've happened in the past. Like, I think that people have got a very foggy memory about how strong set bonuses actually were in the past, because I've heard numbers thrown around like 15-20% was the norm, which it wasn't. It was more like the higher end was 10 or 12 between two. But you could have ones where it was 3 or 4, but in AoE it was 20. And that's totally fine, because you don't always have to AoE. But it's really nice to have a bonus that's crazy there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I worked out the average tier set strength from like tier 20 was like 2-piece was like 2.8%, and 2+4 was like 8.2 or something.
I still
like
have the sheet
15.
that I made for all of the set bonuses between tier 20 and tier 21.
Yeah, mine was tier 19 going into tier 20.
And the absolute peak bonus, the tippy toppy best bonus, was 11.43.
Best I have on list is 12.7.
That was for both pieces, and that was Havoc at the time. And they were going from like 5.6 in the bonus before. And so when people are saying 15-20 is where we should be aiming,
15-20
I
is
don't know
unrealistic.
about that.
That's not real. Nobody wants it to be 15-20. I know you might think you want it to be 15-20, but you don't want it to be 15-20. You don't want
you're going to lose it next expansion, and it's even more borrowed power.
You don't want to be the four fucking Demon Hunter who doesn't have it, and you are just 20% behind. Because let's be real, they are going to tune quotation marks around the tier sets. So you having a 20% tier set doesn't mean you're going to be 20% better than everyone else.
I mean, we all remember the Shard of Domination set bonus thing in SOD.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want that happening again. You don't want that.
No one wants to see Perfecto.
Excuse me.
The thing is as well that if they become really strong, and this for any role, if they become the thing that defines how you play, because like Holy Paladin one, that looks crazy. That looks like it's going to be really strong. It's going to define a playstyle. It's going to synergize with loads of stuff. That's just another thing you're going to lose come 10.0. And that won't be there anymore. You can't expect them to bring all of it back. So it's going to be really weird when you transition.
Well, I guess this is like the win and lose for every external borrowed power at some point. Just circling back to like what is the optimal thing for them to do moving into 10.0 in terms of like external power. Everybody agrees that some form of external power has to exist. Do you guys think it should be something more than tier sets? I'm thinking 10.0 will have tier sets as well. But what about
they need to take a step back?
They need to take a big step back, yeah.
Like,
right.
Take a good example. Right now, I'll take the Prot Paladin example. You're playing Prot Paladin. You're actually supported by your Covenant on 3 out of the 4 Covenants. And you're really playing Enter Covenant here, Prot Paladin. When 10.0 hits, all those abilities will be gone. Divine Toll will be gone.
Yeah.
Ashen will be gone. The whatever buff that they abuse in PvP will be gone. So suddenly you're back to the same old drawing board of the spec is empty. The spec feels hollow. They need to fix this before thinking about borrowed power.
I think a big argument is that a big benefit of borrowed power is that it freshens things up.
Yes.
But we've had like a few expansions now where borrowed power has been like the core. So you've really got space to just not just tier sets, bare minimum borrowed power, really heavily drill down on the base specs and fix those and get those to a satisfying place. Yep. And then you can go from there in future expansions. But at the moment, they don't really have, after Legion, they don't really have a building block to build that borrowed power on, which is why it's been so looked down on.
Mm-hmm.
They're also very hesitant to just drag forward some of it.
They made them talents.
There's so many instances, though, of like things that would just totally suit as a free passive that you just crack on the spec and it doesn't do any harm from Legion. But when you looked at Legion as a whole, in isolation, artifacts, they're totally fine as the 1 point of borrowed power, but then you have to add on relics, and you have to add on legendaries, and then you have to add on the tier sets, and then you have to add on the Netherlight Crucible and all of these things that they add in, like, over and over, and it balloons. It was the same in BFA. Azerite itself, while it came out of the oven a little raw, it was all right. But then you start adding on the other systems that they put in. You have extreme procs, you have weird esoteric trinkets that they put in, and then you have corruption and all of those things as well. They all work together, and you just have to hope that you land on the right one, but you lose it at the end of the expansion, and then you get whiplash. It's like getting, in some cases, it's like getting a stat squish without actually having a stat squish.
I mean, I think the big thing about Legion... Go on.
Yeah, so for instance, Holy Paladin, when they were playing Vision of Perfection, absolutely awesome playstyle with Glimmer, with all the corruptions and everything. Like, what was the name of the CDR corruption? That thing was really fun to play around. Yeah. And then they lost all of it. Well, no, Vod became a talent, and Glimmer became a talent. It's just not the same. Like, it feels like you've basically lost your entire power going from one expansion to the next.
And that's
no
not to
explanation
mention
either.
that when you go between expansions, even ones that don't have squishes in, although we have had quite a lot now at this point, when you do that transition, it already feels bad.
Yep.
For any player who's logging in on a 7.0 patch, an 8.0 patch, whatever, you immediately notice the moment that you get to max level, you get to 16 Shadowlands versus what your experience was at 120 in Nylothar. You've lost all of that haste. Everything's slow. Everything feels like really groggy because you have to readjust to the way that the game plays without all of that stuff. But then you also have to readjust to not having any of the buttons or the weird effects or procs or anything that you've also just lost because they just don't exist anymore. So it makes the next expansion transition incredibly jarring.
Yeah. I don't remember feeling like that, for example, from transitioning from Cataclysm to Mob. I didn't feel as hollow. Like, started leveling and getting to say, what was it, 95? Or 90?
85.
No, it was 85 in Cata and 90 in Mob.
It was 5 levels.
Yeah.
With all of its
Cataclysm
issues.
did not remove anything. That's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
you lost your tier sets from Dragon Soul, and that's it.
That was it. And you still had like the weapons still working and all of that, but it didn't feel as much. So I guess that's a good example of. Sorry, you can.
It's quite like a reductionist way of looking at it, but the when you look at the like Cataclysm, like Wrath to Cataclysm, Cataclysm to Mop, even Mop to Wad, which even had a squish in itself.
Yeah.
Where we were super powerful at the end of Mop with all the trinkets and everything else. You always gained something while you were leveling as sort of compensation for that transition. You got new talents, abilities, new passives in WoD. You always got something. Whereas what it feels like right now, what do you gain when you go from 50 to 60? Because you've just lost all your corruption, all of your Azerite, and all of your essences. You gain a Covenant ability. And if that Covenant ability doesn't land, and it doesn't feel really good to play, then suddenly when you get to max level, it feels bad.
Yeah.
I think
on top of that, you lose all your secondaries, and that was probably the most jarring thing between Legion and BFA, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, especially for haste specs is incredibly strange to do that transition.
Plus the GCD change as well.
And then they tried to monkey patch it with the Uldia buff, like the one that you got every week. And then they sort of forgot it at the end of Uldia, transitioning into a BOD, and we all felt it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it feels really obvious that Legion classes were designed as one package because there was so many reworked classes. Like almost every class was reworked in some way going into Legion. And they were all kind of one package with the artifact. And then when we lost the artifact, classes haven't really been a complete package since then. But the borrowed power hasn't really fulfilled that. I think that's really the core of the issue.
I'd say Shadowlands has helped to resolve that a little bit with Renown. Because as you progressed through the story, you did get stronger, so there was character progression there, intertwined with the actual expansion stories.
I agree. Level. Yeah, I think that's
only at max level.
But I agree that that's okay. Where once you're done, you still do have something to go for. I'm not a fan of the gating, but I understand the reason behind it, so I can't really strongly criticize it. But the thing is that because none of the soulbind effects, which is primarily the renown effect that you're gunning for each week, were tailored to the specs, you were, and the same goes for conduits as well. You were basically dice rolling whether or not you had something that was really good with the way that thing worked.
Yep. Frost Mage on one extreme and
not as
Shaman on the other.
Yeah, it's one of those, the idea is great, but the execution is not perfect.
Exactly.
It's definitely something that should be iterated on.
Because artifact power was fine. That was the same thing that you were like, any normal human was just like grinding it out and getting a few powers each week and so on.
Not normal humans.
Well, yeah, we play WoW.
World of Warcraft players. I'm sitting more souls every day.
It's a different category.
I missed Morrison.
Excuse me,
you-
Islands
you-
was my thing.
You were getting powers like week on week that were specifically tailored to interact with a specific part of your kit, and you felt immediately this is like something that improves this part of my kit. Whereas you get an extra renown level and it's you press your ability and you get some mastery. Well, that's great because I don't care about mastery, so I don't care.
The most egregious one for that was Corain, actually, for Nightfang. Because
that was one that
so many specs just don't have the burst on pull to actually leverage that 25% crit.
I can actually bring a let's say an average player perspective here and hopefully touch on a topic that I personally have an issue with and get you guys to pitch in with your opinions. So I've skipped, unfortunately for me, the core expansions of the game. Like I've skipped Wrath and Kata and Mop, and I played through from vanilla to TBC, and I felt that the progression, because we were talking about progression from expansion to expansion, going from classic to TBC, it felt okay. I was leveling, I was getting new spells, getting new talents. Obviously, they wanted to stray away from keep adding new rows of talents, expansion, extra expansion, because we would have had 100 or so by now. And I mean, people play Path of Exile in the same universe, so it's be that as it may. But personally, and I wanted to know what you guys thought about this, going from WoD to Legion, both in leveling and at max level, felt one of the coolest progressions I've had. In WoW, first of all, in terms of my character, the story. Like you said, I think the artifact that they made was one of the best progressions that I personally enjoyed, because it felt like I was always unlocking something specific to my spec, which felt really cool. And I think this is probably where the problem started, because it was so cool and it kept escalating me to a point where like, okay, I'm getting this new thing, that I would eventually have to give up on. And they probably tried to recreate that with BFA, which kind of flopped, and of course it didn't.
I don't actually think that they even... This is going to sound really mean to the developers, so I apologize. But I don't even think they tried to recreate it in BFA. It's not even remotely comparable.
I don't think they understood at all what made it good.
If you looked at Legion, what was very, very clear is that whoever worked on each person's spec or whatever, whether it was strong, like well designed or well balanced, it was hand tailored. You could see that someone had gone in and looked at what the spec does, how it works, and we're going to make it give this bonus to this button that you press. And you could see it for every single spec. They all had something unique. Whereas you look at BFA, and then you'd look at the powers and you go, wow, this is something that's shared between all of the classes, and it procs some haste. Wow, that's incredibly generic, and it doesn't feel like it interacts with my class at all.
Yep.
They've said this.
There's another part as well, though. Like from the feel of leveling and the feel of playing a character, Legion had something that Shadowlands doesn't. The artifact experience started while leveling, whereas all of Shadowlands starts at max level. So basically, you spend 10 levels not really giving a shit about anything, especially if you don't pick Threads of Fate. And suddenly at max level, you're like, oh, I have conduits. I have soulbinds. They're all generic. Yay!
There's a reason that even though Legion might not have been like the most pristine expansion from A to Z, for some people, there's a reason that it is like highly regarded in post by a lot of people, and it's because from moment one, the second that Dalaran appears, and then you start the expansion, you go and get your artifact, you're immediately like on the path to the end of the expansion, and it's all interlinked and it's all important. And it's very engaging to a player. And BFA and Shadowlands had a real penchant to just disconnect you from what's going on.
Yeah, or take Azerite for example.
Or nothing.
Like you get your neck, and then you have to complete an entire quest zone in order to get the second piece. You're like, excuse me, what? That doesn't work. Like you just gave me an expansion level system only to drop it for an entire zone?
Yeah.
And I think this circled into what I was hoping that we can get to, like a kind of a solution, because it feels it feels more and more of an issue going from expansion to expansion the more they double down on these external power system, and that is the stats like you mentioned, and haste, because obviously corruption scaled everybody to like stupid levels. I've heard of like anything from 100 to 500% haste destroy warlocks or something crazy like that, and it always has to be neutered down with the next expansion. So I personally feel like the stats, and obviously maybe it's a problem with the gearing system, is either antiquated or fundamentally flawed, because you have specs that rotate around haste and certain specs that actually peak after a certain amount of haste that you can actually, now I'm starting to do things. I felt, particularly as an average player, I felt this a lot with survival and enhancement in Shadowlands specifically, where with the spec just feels like a different class when I have Bloodlust on. And okay, that's cool, but then I gain that haste throughout the expansion, then I lose it again, because obviously we cannot get to like 1000% haste in like 2 expansions. So do you guys think that just the stat scaling in gear is flawed fundamentally? Do you think this is a problem, or what would be the problem going from expansion to expansion to not feel like you're just like neutered down to level 1? Is it something that they can fix with gear? Is it something they can fix with readdressing how secondary stats work? What are your guys' opinion on this?
What you're describing there actually has a precedent where they actually did it right. The transition on Fire Mage between Wrath the Lich King and Cataclysm.
Not just Fire, Fury is a really good example as well.
Yeah.
That's probably
it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the specs were crit dependent, like extremely heavily crit dependent. And when they moved off from one expansion to the next, somebody on the dev team went and actually playtested the spec and went, hold on, there's way too much of a crit dependence. We are going to fix this. And they did.
And the way that they fix it, every time when it's done right, is if it's that dependent on a stat, you build it into the way that the spec always operates. It doesn't rely on having the stat to do it, which is why Rampage exists. And people might not like the way that current Fury works, but it fixed a lot of the problems that early expansion Fury had, where you go into the expansion and suddenly you've gone from having like 90, 100% uptime on Enrage to 30. That feels really jarring. So we'll just make it so that it flattens.
Yep. So in the past, like especially, I'm going to take Wrath as an example, and I'm still going to take Mage. At the start of the expansion, you played either Frost or Arcane, because Frost actually doesn't care about crit past 33%. And Arcane just didn't care back then, basically. Arcane was basically a one-button spec. Fire, on the other hand, required 45% crit to work. So Fire was unplayable at the start of the expansion and was hands down the best spec at the end, like in ICC and Ruby Sanctum. And they fixed this by adding the whole, if your fireball doesn't crit, you gain, I can't remember if back then it was 10 or 20% extra crit chance on the next fireball, stacking. The spec is fixed. The spec has much less of a crit dependency. They need to go in and playtest all the specs.
Crit every spell.
Yeah. I mean, Combustion was already like this in Wrath. But like, all they need to do is go in, see the problems, and fix them.
So the same goes for like haste dependent specs, is that they need to have a way to get it in the spec, in a proc, a mechanic in the spec. Like the same goes for Shadow. Shadow is very haste dependent. So what does Void Form do? In your cooldown, you get a lot of haste. That's really nice. And suddenly, it doesn't feel quite as jarring when you transition to having less haste overall, but you have a lot to float.
So decreasing the stat dependency, secondary stat dependency in this case for specs would probably solve this issue, like you guys are saying. Do you think that if they would apply this across the board, would that influence the gear system in WoW to any extent?
Yes and no. It's not lessening the dependency, it's providing a floor. So it would naturally make certain specs, like for instance, Fury back then just wanted crit and nothing else, to want less crit and more of other things. It drives a dynamic that becomes really, really healthy for everybody involved. Because suddenly there is no real piece of gear where you're like, well, I don't want it, it doesn't have crit on it.
And it also removes, because a lot of the time these dependencies are either gameplay feel or RNG inducing. Crit is the obvious example for that. And you need to lessen that extreme of the whiplash from losing it. You don't need to have 100% extreme up incredible variance because I didn't crit, so nothing works anymore. I can't press my buttons. You can have it somewhere in the middle where it's reliable, but more crit makes it even more reliable. So you still want the stat, it's just not the be-all end-all. And the same goes for haste. You don't need to have it where you suddenly go from 0.75 GCD to a 1.5 in the space of a week and feel like you're walking through molasses when you're playing the game.
Yeah. I mean, I figured at this point, some folks are going to be wondering, like, hey, why all this talk about classes and everything regarding classes? But I think we made a pretty clear statement at the beginning of the podcast. All of us in this chat here feel like the first thing you feel in World of Warcraft is the character you pick on, and this is like your scope into everything you interact with, right? We can talk about other content. And just sort of circling back on the strengths of WoW, we talked about WoW still having some of the best raids. Not everybody raids. Some people like to do dungeons. Some people just like to do, I don't know, pet battles or whatever. But it's still
or
very...
arenas.
Oh, yeah, well, we cannot go too much into that. It's a different type of podcast. But just thinking about everything that was discussed over here, and you guys touched on the gearing, how do you guys feel the way of acquiring gear works in Shadowlands now, and how can this be, I don't know, better addressed in 10.0? I don't know if 9.0.
So many things to fix. We're going to be here for another 3 or 4 hours if we go in that topic.
I give you a breakdown really, really simply in like one sentence. They need to be less stingy with it. It doesn't matter. Like, someone doesn't need to have to grind out every single possible content stream to get a sliver of a chance to maybe get the piece that they want. You can just hand it out. The prestige is no longer in the game, and everyone, while they like harken back to, it was great to see that guy standing on a mailbox wearing full tier armor from Nax. Yeah, that's great. It was there once, but it's never coming back because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your character looks like. Everyone's picked the transmog that they're going to use for the rest of the time they play the game at this point. In a lot of cases, people have their set. That's what they're going to look like. It doesn't matter. The point is, they don't want to feel like I'm doing this content and there's a tiny chance that I'll get something. Just let them get stuff. Let them play around with things. Make it more abundant. Once they pulled it back in Shadowlands, that felt horrible. Everyone noticed it.
Yep, true.
Gets even worse when you consider all the catch-up problems. Like, you want to try a new alt or something like this. What are your gearing options? You go into the raid. Well, first of all, nobody takes you unless you have friends. And on top of that, you're going to come out with one piece, maybe 2 pieces. It's going to take you, 5, 6, 7 weeks to actually get to a level where you can actually be competitive. Mythic Plus drops literally nothing. The best avenue in Season 1, which was PvP, is basically dead and buried. What else are you left with?
It's kind of crazy to me that they also just completely abandoned the weapon token system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find that very offensive. I think that's ridiculous.
It was such a good fix to the issue of, like, if you're the only rogue in the raid, then the only way you get daggers is if they drop for you.
Yep. Especially when you double whammy with the Sylvanas dagger.
Yeah. And then just
you
getting
make
rid of
those
the
powers
tokens,
incredibly powerful.
Which was like the perfect solution.
Like, it's not difficult to instead just say, well, Sylvanas drops a Coalesced Orb of Torment, and you go and turn that in, and it's any of the weapons from the high item level bosses. It wouldn't
You've
be
had that name saved up for a while, haven't you?
It sounds like it.
You just pick a general WoW thing. That's what they'd come up with, right?
Yeah.
The biggest problem that comes with this is that, like, when you say at the beginning of the podcast that the biggest strength is the diversity in the specs and in interfacing with the game with different classes that all play differently, anything that gets in the way of that or suppresses your ability to do that is bad. And that's what the gearing system right now is actively doing.
Yep. I mean, take another good example. Like, I'm going to take a parallel because we all have at least touched the game.
Yeah.
In, the main rival at the moment, which is Final Fantasy XIV.
Yeah.
The crafted gear is almost as good as raiding gear.
Yes.
You can straight up get a job to max level, do stuff, go to the market board, and be competitive. You won't be optimal, but you'll be good enough. Whereas WoW puts you on this 3-4 week treadmill where you just need to basically pray for things to drop, pray for the right things to drop with Shards of Domination and with tier sets in 9.2, pray for the right weapon to drop, pray for everything in the right thing to drop. And until then, you're useless. There is no catch-up.
In expansions past, you were able to do that. In like,
yeah,
TBC,
absolutely.
with your profession gear, you can get a few slots which were raid eye level.
Yeah, but you could get the desirable slots as well, like the weapons for weaponsmiths from in BC and later on in Wrath. Like, right now, you can't get a weapon. The only way to get a weapon is BOEs, and they're at, what, 190?
It's also the volume of gear that drops is so pinched right now.
Yep.
When you look at I would say that in WoD, that was probably the point where there was the highest volume of people just jumping in pugs and just doing Hellfire on random classes, whatever. There was pugs everywhere. The exact same happened in Siege, but I'd say to a lesser extent in terms of like variance, because obviously the length of Hellfire.
It was slightly harder in Siege because of like it was OQ as opposed to the in-game.
Yeah, and when you did WoD, you could level a character, you could jump into a normal raid, you could probably get your tier set, you could probably grab a few pieces, especially because Master Looter existed then as well, but that's an entire different kettle of fish. You could grab that. Once you've got that, you are effectively good enough, and you can go and jump into whatever. You can go into a Pog in Heroic, you can probably do a bit of Mythic, you can probably do all of Mythic in some cases. So people were like, well, I spend a couple of days leveling, I spend a week, 2 weeks pugging, and then I can do whatever I want, and I can just play this character. Right now, you're like 2 months out if you start a new character right now, unless you get boosted.
On top of that,
if we talk about the naughty word.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on top of that, the gear stinginess has also affected the ability for trade, which double whammies even further. Like when you go into, it's particularly during Mythic Plus, where you're going to do an instance, there's 5 people in the group, there's 2 items dropping at the end of it, and like it just sets everybody back by so much. If a piece is like possible to, well, first of all, it needs to drop out of a pool of like 50 items, and then on top of that, if somebody doesn't need it, there's like the chance is low for them not to need it, especially for trinkets. So it just sets everybody back. Anybody who has wanted a specific trinket from Mythic Plus probably knows this, like things like Fire of Putrefaction and things like that, which are just so difficult to get.
It makes it even worse, I think even worse for specifically tanks and healers, because if you go into, say you want a blood spattered scale from other side, and you're the tank, the only person who's going to get that to even be able to trade it is you. So you have to not only be the person who gets items from the chest, you also have to high roll and get the item that you want from the chest, and no one's going to help you with that.
Yep.
You guys mentioned the weapon tokens, and this is something that I initially thought was going to happen when they talked about Valor before that it was actually announced, because with the changes with the weekly vaults and the loot stinginess, it felt like if you were lucky, you would be able to gear yourself. Otherwise, you would have to like spend every day to get gear, because we're not even going to talk about the RNG or the fact that Marcellin keeps looting bracers for like 2 months straight.
Instead of the goddamn daggers, and I'm a sub-roll. Fucking hell.
And my hunter still has 226 braces from last season.
Hey!
One of our hunters still doesn't have his Sylvanas bow.
Even bringing up the vault I think the vault is actually, it wasn't really a fix. It still feels bad when you get them, but when they put in this new currency that you pick, or when you had the Stygia as your consolation prize for everything being awful that you got.
It's okay.
Why can't we convert that currency
into Valor?
an item that we want?
Yes, why not?
This is exactly what I was trying to get at, because initially I thought that the Valor would be a vendor where you can just acquire currency somehow, either by disenchanting, scrapping, or whatever you want to call it, items that you don't need, because you know when I'm not necessarily opposed to the amount of loot, unless there was a reasonable method of attaining a specific goal without adding randomness to it. So okay, the loot drops two random items to 5 random people, and those items are random, and it might be what you want or not. But if I loot like 1 or 2 items that are bad for me, like I cannot do anything. I could upgrade them with Valor for whatever reason, and then eventually loot the items that I want, because the Valor points are upgrading items, and they're not even upgrading to the max level. So it's not necessarily a fix. It's kind of like a pat on the back. So
There's
and I can
so many things wrong with Valor.
And I could definitely see the issue.
Valor isn't a fix to the problem, but I think the biggest problem right now is they want to have their cake and eat it by designing crazy, wacky items that do things and they're super desirable and they're really strong, like the weapon procs in Sanctum and certain trinkets and so on, but make it stingy to acquire them. If you're going to have an item that is so important to have, that's like 7, 8, 9% increase, like daggers from Sylvanas is a good example as well, or Jaethys from KT. If you want to have that item exist and be so astronomically better than any other item that you can get, you can't make it a dice roll to get it. You have to be like, okay, it's really, really strong and it's really cool when you get it, and it will take you at most 3 weeks of picking up this random currency and you'll get it. And that's a okay goal. Not right now.
I could definitely see the issue with having a vendor to exchange currency for, because it kind of takes away that RPG element of like, oh, I finally got it. It doesn't. I don't think it should be necessarily 100% control, but at least if we're gonna have these many layers of RNG, there should be like one specific system that we can reliably use to acquire at least 1 or 2 of our core items, because it's fun when items are like Wordup said, so astronomically cool, like the Spear and the 9, which I still don't have. And that makes it exciting to do that content. And sure, it doesn't have to always drop, but it has to drop eventually. And when does that drop? The first time I do my vault, or after like 6 months of farming the boss?
It drops at that point where you're so fed up and so torn down and burned up of the content that you don't really feel excited anymore. This is the thing, right?
Yeah. The thing is, there's only 2 paths. You either make it guaranteeably acquirable at a certain point, or you don't get to design items that are that strong. Because it just creates winners and losers where people are miserable because I don't have it, and that's all that I care about. And I didn't get it this week, so I'll see you next week.
There was a time in history where they actually had this lesson that they could have learned, which was WoD in, basically any time in PvP in WoD with Conquest. Because Conquest was actually designed very, very similarly to, except that instead of upgrading, it was a vendor. And you could still get random pieces from like winning arenas and whatever.
Yeah.
But you would be able to buy whatever pieces you didn't actually have with the currency that you got. It's exactly what you're describing, like with the Valor and how it should work. Yeah. And it's something that like they've done in the past, but they did not learn the lesson from it.
It's the gap of a good item versus a bad item is so big right now, that it means that when you get an item that you should be happy about, so you get a 252 pair of legs and it's an upgrade, you should be happy that you got it, but it came off a boss that also has your 252 weapon with a proc that's worth like 8% damage. So you go, oh, I got an item that's good, but it's not the one that I wanted, so I'm not happy that I got loot.
Yeah. Kills.
That's always a bad sign that the loot system is flawed.
Add in the bloated loot tables to it. Like, I'm pretty sure there's at least one person in the room who has still not seen the fist weapon from Painsmith.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
We got one last week.
The Painsmith drop.
If we're playing the game and pointing it at me, I've got 2. But
what?
I spent a solid 3.5 months never even seeing a normal one.
Any Warbucks over here.
We got our very first one last week, and we've been doing it every week.
Damn.
It gets even worse when you consider skips, by the way, because like in some raids you didn't have them, so you had to kill all the bosses. But now, what happens if your weapon drops from the 9?
Well, I'd also like to add, for a few of the weeks, we had 16 people in the loot spec to trade it, and none of them got it.
Yeah,
there you go.
On average, it's about 10, 12. So,
and not only that, you also, in that case, you need 2 of them, and there's probably 3 or 4 people who want them. So you need 8 across your raid.
Yep.
So that means that even in a fair loot system, someone's going to end up having a miserable time.
Got so many Painsmith rings though. Rings for days.
Oh yeah.
Dude,
We
it's
are the Lord of the
the
Rings.
neck from Remnant for us.
Oh yeah.
We get like 4 of those a week.
Remnant has like 5 items, and everyone can loot the neck. So it's like, okay, next for everyone.
The best one on that is Mythic Plus, actually. It's Theatre of Pain, where all the casters
And you
want
get, like,
one
6
trinket from
rings.
there, but there's 4 rings.
Yeah. About to get a ring, consolation price. There you go.
I remember there being a dungeon with like one really good trinket and like 3 shit trinkets. Was it still Theater of Pain? So you, I guess, already in Ruby, but all of the other ones I have never heard of ever.
There's only one caster trinket in TOP. I think the one that you're thinking of, honestly, like Sanguine Depth is sort of like that for tanks, where you have the Blade Dancer's vendor kit. And if you're a prot pad, then there's also one hander and a shield in there. So you kind of have to, risk it for the biscuit.
I think the thing with it is that even though weapon tokens would fix quite a bit of some of the problems, though I feel the most for rogues, because that dagger is incredibly valuable.
Yeah,
It's orders of magnitude of power better than any other possible item you can get. But very rarely are you going to be able to trade it around. And there is no reason to hide that amount of power behind what is effectively a 1 in 20 chance. Well, actually, it's more than that, because there's like 2 other items that could happen of you being the person that gets it. And if you're going to put something that powerful in, you should treat it the exact same as having a finite time to get all of your shards, because that's how powerful those items are. And if someone's allowed to be really mad that they didn't get all their shards, which they absolutely are, because that was a big problem as well, then rogues are just as equally able to be mad that it takes ages for them to get the dagger.
Yeah. For the dagger specifically, I don't even get, like, it's a lore item as well as being a really powerful weapon. They could have just built a quest around it. Kill Sylvanas, start the quest, get the dagger at the end of the quest kind of thing.
Or kill Sylvanas like 4 times, loot whatever currency they can come up with, and then you just trade that in for it.
Exactly.
There's
like
so many ways.
Those are all solutions to think. If you want to put a cool ass item in that everyone wants, that's really strong, you can make it as strong as you want. Just make it so that someone knows, they can picture it in their head. 3 weeks from now, I'm going to be wearing that dagger, and it's going to be badass.
Yeah.
Not like 3 months from now, it's never dropped, and I'm still miserable.
Yeah, and when it drops, you're like so burned out. It's like you don't even care anymore. It's like, yeah, fuck it, it's here.
No. You're a rogue. You need a second one.
Oh yeah, forgot about that.
3 more months.
Yeah. So basically 6 months of engagement at the earnings call. What? All right.
Even still at that point, you've killed the boss. You don't need the item for the extra damage anymore to kill the boss. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess that depends on your philosophy around farm versus...
Yeah, that's
I think in the case of the dagger as well, you'd want the heroic one, and people would go all the way through mythic, which in some cases that's like 2 or 3 months of progress, and they wouldn't even see a heroic one.
Yeah,
that is exhausting.
Yeah, it's basically what I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I killed Sylvanas on heroic 6 times, and with the other rogues too in the group, mind you. No dagger. So yeah, I guess gearing has its work cut out for it. I think the tokens would be one thing. I didn't really mind the tokens. They were a pretty good feeling way of not totally being feeling miserable at the end of.
They would have to be on a separate loot table, right? Because then you have the exact same issue.
Well, I think the reasoning why they removed the tokens was exactly because they skewed the loot table, and there was no point. It's like you don't.
It's not a big of an issue if you have the tokens. You don't need to put them on a separate loot table because you're guaranteed to have at least 5 or 6 people in a raid who can drop it. So it gets shared around eventually. As opposed to now, where some specs, they're the only person who can loot it. So either they drop it or they're shit out of luck. See you next week. Again and again and again and again.
Oh, man. But yeah, in terms of fixes, I think everybody can agree that some sort of I don't know, currency or material, I don't know, something that can be transformed into a proper way of purchasing that item after I don't know, I think Wordup said it like 3 weeks. In 3 weeks' time, even if you got that unlucky, you'll still be able to get that item if it's so impactful, right? Because if it's like a bump of 7 or 8% in your damage, then you want some sort of reassurance, let's say. And don't give me that bad luck protection bullshit either. It's like, okay.
The same goes for like trinkets or specific gear items for like tanks or healers. You can't have items that are really crazy for them if they need that to live on a fight, but they don't get it. What does that happen? What does that mean if you get to that boss? Does that just mean your tank can't survive? Can you not heal through the damage? If you don't have it, then that's it. Sorry, deal with it. That's not good either. Because
scenario,
like we had it with our tank where they didn't have the trinket from the 9, which they really needed to deal with soaking up the pools on Sylvanas. They didn't have it, and it was obviously something that would have fixed a lot of problems, but they don't have it. So what are we gonna do? We can't fix the problem. We can't do anything. We can't mitigate it, and they can't go out of their way to get it.
Yeah, I had to be very creative on Sylvanas progress because I didn't have Aegis. And I got it the week after we killed it.
Well, and then suddenly everything feels really comfy.
Is this when I introduce you guys to LFR?
I got a normal version the week after we killed it. I got the mythic version on our 8th Sylvanas kill.
Still good.
So,
that's still tragic.
And I was just like, I'm just not going to use the normal one. It's too low.
Just out of protest.
I don't need it. I've killed the boss without it. I know my cooldown plan now.
You already figured out the way.
Take a case like in the world first as an example. A very niche thing. The Fate Scribe trinket was something that they specifically used to abuse KT. What happens if they never got any of those?
Yep, that means they would have lost the race.
That means they can't kill the boss doing that.
Actually, it's even worse than that because they gave the trinkets to DPS classes. So, like, there were 2 layers of it that went into this strategy, and they knew it from PTR, obviously. But they got the trinkets, and they gave them to the people that were not even supposed to loot them.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a mess.
But if you could get those items reasonably in some way, there's not a problem. I don't think it's the limitation of how consistently you can expect to get something that you know you really need.
I mean, that can also be kind of somewhat fixed with the vault by being able to target which areas you want your randomized loot to come from. In more detail.
I have been an enormous proponent of this from when the vault came in Legion, where in MOP where you can flag the dungeon that you get the rep or the rep that you get from the dungeon. I just think if we can go and speak to the dude at the vault and they say, I want one of my items to be a weapon item, or I want one of my items to come from the other side, or I want one of my items to come from Sylvanas. Why not do that?
Yes, and just make it the first slot only.
It can't really be
too far, right?
Yeah. You just get to pick one, but you get to hyper specify what you want from that one with a little bit of RNG in it, but enough that you still feel like you have some control over.
You have a shot. Yeah. Like maybe you wouldn't get the absolute best weapon or whatever, but you get something.
It removes situations of like
were good as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You could target exactly what you want.
Pick the boss. Yes.
Because it also removes those edge cases where I don't know if you ever had this, but we had it, and I personally had it as well. I don't want to kill this boss because it's going to make my vault polluted with more loot that I absolutely don't want. I just only want to have this number of bosses killed, and I don't want to have ever killed that boss because I don't want anything from it, which is
but it's
really
true.
Bad.
Yeah,
but I have the issue of I've not looted 3 bosses in a row. Can I be benched? No, I can't. I'm a tank.
That's the other issue.
Yeah, that happens as
well.
well.
Having to fuck around with the pseudo RNG garbage where you're like, haven't looted or raid, should probably sit out. Which is like, you shouldn't be encouraged not to do shit. Yeah, like it's, yeah. Which is just a mess.
It's an awful feeling because you want to play, but you also want to be rewarded the way that you feel is fair to you.
It's that you have to come up with
where it's like, okay, this will literally only give me a ring or a neck.
You have to jump through all these hoops and come up with these like conspiracy theories, like how I don't want to kill this boss because Mercury is in retrograde, so I need to make sure that we kill it in like an hour instead, to maybe possibly get a higher chance to get the item that I want. Because everything's in this black box.
My chakras aren't aligned when I do the 9 and I don't get the trinket.
Yeah, I and that's what, like, the black box of loot has become so aggressive that everyone has their own like rituals to maybe get the thing that they know that's what they care about.
Yep. RP walk from the door to the vault, jump 3 times, spin around, right click, cancel last second, do it again.
I'm gonna have to remember that.
Yeah, you always spin your pack 4 times around before you open it in Hearthstone, and you'll get a legendary. It's guaranteed.
It's not just about opening the vault, though. Like, there are so many weird other things, particularly at the start of the tier, where you're like, well, I'm going to open my vault, but I'm not going to pick anything. Because loot is so stingy that I might actually lose out on it.
I'll go and I'll do my clear.
Yeah, and that also means that you're being selfish to everyone else. But
exactly.
Because then you can't trade.
But you basically have to do it for your own sake, because otherwise you could potentially loot the item that you just got, and someone else gets something, and that's my only piece of loot for the week.
I actively encourage my raiders to do it. To say, like, that's an item you need, but can you trade that slot? Yes, okay. If you loot it, then you trade it, get it from your vault. If you don't loot it, go get it from your vault. That way it's win-win.
Assuming that they have a higher item level in the slot.
Whole concept relies on, can you trade it?
It also relies on, can you trust people to not just say, not just say like, I got the item, so I'll pick something else that I also
you said no? Out. That's it, G-kick.
Now we can make spreadsheets with SimCs of everybody's vaults. I can see that happening.
I actually do a Droptimizer for every
implying we don't all submit Droptimizers already.
It's all just like very unhealthy, the whole loot dichotomy right now. It's not conducive to people playing with each other. They're all playing to desperately scrounge for the scraps that they could possibly get.
Yep. And they will screw each other over it eventually, basically. But like the more scarcity there is, and I'm really worried about that for next year, because this tier was already pretty bad with the number of slots that were locked. Like, you had your legendary, you had your 5 domination shards, 3 of them were super important. You had your weapons, because all of them were like stupidly strong. You had your trinkets. If you didn't get those, then you were basically permanently behind until you got them. Next year, we're adding tier sets into the mix. It's so many more opportunities where people are just going to basically screw each other over in their attempt to get there first.
This isn't to mention as well that Nathria was one of the first times that I remember where a lot of higher end guilds who were consistently split running and so on, after Nathria, they basically said, doesn't really matter anymore because it doesn't do anything. There's all this like weird overlaps and stuff. So we're just going to clear it once. And then Sanctum comes out and it suddenly becomes, oh my God, we need to split everything in every possible difficulty to spread it out as much as possible, because if we don't have it, then we are worthless.
Yep.
So they almost fixed one of their oldest problems and immediately reintroduced it.
They end on it. So they amplified it as well when they reintroduced it, because the whole shard thing was just insane.
Like the shards and the embers, because the embers, like, even as a returning player, you're permanently 10 weeks behind if you do absolutely everything.
Yep. Like, that's the thing that I don't understand as well. Like, we could clearly tell from the patch notes that the whole upgrading system was a last minute change. Like the fact that the rune word or whatever the 3-set bonus was upgraded with the shard level, but neither how it was done or the relative strength of it was clearly thought and tested. And it led to people like Perfecto getting perma-benched because, can't get the 3rd shot to drop.
Yeah. But it was such a huge difference that it was like, if you don't get it, you're not a player.
As a tank, Bloodlink was just completely overpowered.
There was a distinct gap in, how bosses felt to progress against. When you had a majority of your DPS with the Unholy set, there'd be some weeks where, the early weeks of progress, boss kills would be, 6 minutes or so. And then kind of week 3, once you got 10 people with set bonuses, it'd be 5 minutes. Week 6, where all the raid has the bonuses, like 4.5. It's just cut down dramatically, and that before item level inflation is taken into account. Item level inflation only really cuts off like 10 seconds or so each week.
I guess item level inflation. Well, I think Ian had a developer Q&A back in BFA where they said that they liked the item level inflation from patch to patch to give the player that sense of amazement when you get that new item and it actually feels like it's an upgrade because it's 30 levels higher. And yeah, I guess that opens a whole other can of beans. But just to clarify on this, to see if I got it right. Do you guys think like if they would do like one thing, let's say minimal effort, supposing from a premise that they don't have enough people to fix all of this in 9.2, would adding a feature to the vault where you can target either the dungeon, the boss, or the slot, would that fix? I can see this fixing a lot of issues. Would that fix like all of the issues currently, at least band-aid them until 10.0, hopefully coming up with something better?
Why not?
Wouldn't fix, but it would alleviate the lion's share of the FOMO that comes with it. Because ultimately, the thing is, you get one vault a week, and when you start off your week reset, you wake up, you open your vault. This is the start of the reset. We're going to raid tonight. It's going to be great. And then you open your vault, and there's nothing in there that you want. It's all just awful, and you didn't even get to participate in it. You immediately start the week off on the wrong foot. You're in a bad mood. You're just unhappy about what just happened. If you at least were able to say, I need a weapon, I want a weapon, or I need an item from Sylvanas. All of that, it just means that, you wake up and go, well, it's not the best one that I could have got, but at least it's something. At least my characters move forward. You always then feel like, you were in control of that choice. You made it, so you feel better.
Why tie the entire thing to the vault, by the way? Because, just bring back one bonus roll per week, 100% chance. Spend it on anything you want. You've sort of fixed it.
This is like a core Blizzard issue where they have something that kind of works, and instead of iterating on it and making it fit what it needs to do better, they just ditch it for something brand new with different problems.
The vault is the weekly loot spectacle, and you want that experience to be positive.
Yep.
I think you can also tie it to the getting currency, blah, blah, blah. You know that you're always going to get it, and having bonus rolls. But if you want to keep the vault idea, and it is something that they have right from the start when they put the box in Legion, it's not a bad thing to have exist. The bad thing is when you feel like your one shot that week was a dud. That always feels miserable, because that means that you can crystallize exactly how long it's going to be until you get your next chance, and everything in between that is kind of like, well,
it gets repeated
whatever.
as well, because you get your first bad vault and you're like, okay, I'll fill it in again. You get your second bad vault, you go, well, why should I bother? I guess I'll try again. You get your third currency vault and you're like, fuck this shit.
Love getting boots 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah, basically.
Pretty much.
You have the same kind of issues with bonus rolls as well. Like, you'd get to the boss, you'd kill it, you didn't get an item, you rolled, you get gold.
Yeah. Yeah, but this was a fundamental UX failure. The bonus roll should have been 100%. They should have been a lot less frequent. Like, you should not have been getting 3 of them, but it should 100% have been guaranteed drop.
You get one, caps at
it's
one.
Not good to get the gold, but the big part is you still had control over it.
Yep.
If you as a player knew, I need something from this, and I will spend something specifically here to get more of a chance. Whereas right now, what happens, say, because everyone has basically bought into the, you don't get loot 2 bosses in a row. So you kill a boss and then you get loot, and it's the boss before the one that you want. You immediately just say, oh, well, this week's ruined.
Yep.
But with bonus rolls, it also encouraged people to do heroic, because you could re-kill the boss and roll again.
Yep.
Which is something that's definitely missing this expansion, probably quite noticeable by people plugging, because there's no kind of high-level whales coming in to help out with certain bosses.
So just like a poor part of pugging is just having a couple of people who are just like absurdly geared. Like, that is for time memoriam, that is how pugging has functioned.
Yeah, but that's a good thing, and it's like it's completely missing this expansion.
Well, it's a good
Exactly,
thing, and it's
yeah.
also to, and I know it's a very touchy subject. It's the reason the boosting has gone up as well, because there is no reason other than to make money, or like in the game.
Yep.
To go and do heroic if you're geared anymore, because you don't need anything from it, and there's no loot that you need to roll or anything. So you're just selling your time for gold.
Yep. It's even more flagrant for Mythic Plus, by the way, because like the gear is shit, the experience is shit. You're there for your 10 slots, so you can actually get the right trinket, basically. So why not monetize your time at the same time?
Very true. What we're looking at here? 2 hours?
we're 2 hours in.
All right. Well,
It's been a minute.
I was actually gonna propose that we can make, I don't know, a series out of this.
I was actually thinking the same thing.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure we don't have like a bandwidth or a length limit right now, but I'm not that sure. So I just want to make it. In terms of like, I know we've put down on the list a couple of subjects here that I don't know if we touched on them in this one, but if you guys are down, we can make this like, I don't know, maybe a
Episode 2, episode 3. I mean, I think I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we're touching
We'll get it somewhere.
constructively on some important topics, and obviously we can be a little bit more passionate about certain topics, and I think that's fine. I think that kind of shows how much we actually care about the game and how invested we are into actually hoping that things will change for the best. So I'm kind of hopeful that people will pick up on it. Who knows? Maybe a dev or two will watch it eventually.
Yeah.
And figure out that actually people have taken out of their day to really think things through and come up with a solution as well, not just banter and stuff.
Yeah, not to mention the caliber of people we have on the show who, apart from joining the podcast and talking about the stuff, these are people that are actually theory crafting and simming and writing guides, and I hope everybody understands that this is all with the sole purpose to make this game that we love a little bit better. I don't know.
Fuck yeah. We don't do this shit because, like, for the good of it. Like, we are all genuinely absurdly passionate about the game. Like, we want the game to be good. We don't want these changes for, like, zero reason. We want the game to be better. That is where it all comes from.
It's not complaining just because it's fun to moan. It's not like we're making a Reddit thread to just shit on the devs and everything like that. It's because we legitimately really enjoy playing the game and can see how close it is to being right, and just trying to nudge them over the finish line almost. Because, at least from my point of view, I'm not smart enough or professional enough to make anything close to the quality that the game has been in the past, and the overarching thing as well. But I do know from playing it that there are a few things that might not come up in QA or whatever else, but I can clearly identify if you just change the dial a little bit this direction.
Yep.
Everyone will be waiting.
In the box, outside the box thinking problem, basically. Like, it's an outside perspective that would actually help craft the game.
Yep. I mean, I don't think anybody here approaches any type of feedback or discussions, as a super high-end game dev or whatever. This is basically the perspective of people who are really passionate, and as Mandl mentioned it, right? It's outside external experience that can probably help model like the future of the game. Because let's be real, WoW isn't drawing too much of a new crowd anymore. I don't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it for a longer time now. So what better way to make it a little bit better than with the actual crowd that still lingers, which is,
Think about this one for a minute. There's another big problem when it comes to new crowd engagement. And it's something that I tried to report when 9.1 came along, and again when 9.1.5 came along. You're a new player. You join the game. You buy the game, then you buy Shadowlands, you get to level 60. You have no renown level 40 item. So you need to grind the first 40 renown, do the campaign, buy a legendary for like 50, 100k, go do Torghast, go do stuff, get familiar with all the systems, read a guide about the systems. You get drowned in stuff that is like necessary to do, but all at the same time. From a user experience perspective, that is one of the things that they absolutely need to fix if they want to get new players in. There is too much to learn and too much money to spend.
It is a fixable problem. From my point of view, is it's not drawing in a new crowd, but I feel like there's a reason for that. And it's because the people at the top end who've already done everything, if someone comes and asks them what it was like and what it is like, they'll be able to say, yeah, there's bits that are really fun and stuff, but it's all at the end. And there's going to be problems along the way. So your biggest source of marketing, which is word of mouth, which is how games always have worked, is working against you, and not maliciously. It's just how it is right now.
It's the reality of the game, yeah.
As unfortunate as it is to bring up, like, because it is just a meme, but to bring up Final Fantasy, the biggest thing with that game is that the people who play it are constantly singing its praises to everyone who asks.
Yep.
For whatever reason. And they might not always be right. And a lot of the things that they say is kind of weird, but
they used to be a
that
time.
Piques curiosity of you thinking, God, there's a lot of people who are really enjoying this and they have nothing negative to say. And then you speak to a WoW player and they go, yeah, it's all right.
I mean, the things that are negative with Final Fantasy are also much later in the path, and they don't prevent you from actually playing with your friends. Because, like, recruit somebody on Final Fantasy 14, you can do content with them, no problem. Like, they'll be up to speed in no time. You can even level sync content like trials, whatever, with them. In WoW, that's not the case. In WoW, you'll be dragging them for 3 weeks, even if they get to max level.
Yeah, the barrier to entry issue is probably one of the biggest things that's stopping any new player from giving it a whirl.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I guess part of the solutions we've tried to compile here, hopefully are clear enough. Not sure if 9.2 is going to be a step in the right direction. We'll have to see. PTR, I think PTR is probably up by now. We'll look at that in the future weeks. But I think this is more directed towards 10.0, because let's be fair, when they do try to make something much more stable or fix something that has a bigger impact, it's usually on a new expansion. I'm just gonna
more likely,
kind of try to wrap it up here for this first round of Breaking WoW. I like to call it
Breaking WoW.
Breaking World of Warcraft, yeah. Because I feel like there's still a lot more stuff to discuss. I just want to make it a nice wrap here, and possibly get on this train again in 2 or 3 weeks. We have some more data for 9.2 and address a couple of those things and the other subjects that were on.
I mean, they're already
one small thing though. When you say that we're aiming at 10.0, that is true. That's like where a lot of the things need to go. I have to say, personally, I think that 9.2 is incredibly important, and this is like directed directly at whoever's developing the game right now. If anyone is paying attention, 9.2 is really, really important. If 9.2 is a mess, especially in terms of like what a lot of players have addressed as like problems, in terms of how visible it is that things are being addressed or being worked on, there is a lot of ramifications in terms of like player-based community, blah blah blah, that will probably happen.
Yep.
Now 9.2 has to be a turning point.
It has to be at least neutral. It doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to blow everyone's brains out, but it needs to be something that is received okay. Because otherwise, a lot of the things that people rely on, things like databases, guides, sims, all of those things, they're going to, and Discords, community, those things are going to start eroding if people lose faith. And 10.0 is far enough out that I don't know whether or not you can like snap your fingers and rebuild that on the spot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's not possible. I mean, look at the class discords. They took 4 years to establish. You can't bring that back if it gets broken. And that's a major source of information and also goodwill, by the way, from people.
Yeah. 100%.
Because we're like very often when something goes weird on PTR or things like that, we're always there trying to calm people.
Very true. I guess it has to be at least a sign of them finally acknowledging all of these years of feedback and discussions and all of that. That 9.2 at least needs to be something that gives that glimmer of, okay, they finally got it.
They're looking like they get it, and they've done it before with like last patches of expansion where they kind of addressed some of the concerns. I'm thinking, Legion Legendary vendor stuff like that.
But it has to be more than that.
I mean,
Exactly. They just need to like reinstill a little bit of good faith to the people who are like die hard, really invested and interested in the game, who have had like their will starting to break with it. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be a grand gesture. It doesn't need to be perfect. And it doesn't need to be the best patch in the universe. It just needs to be on the scale going toward where it looks like it might improve.
Yeah.
There's another thing that also needs to happen after 9.2, like immediately. There needs to be a much better level of communication and feedback and basically guidance on what they are going to do. Yeah. Because that's one thing that's been missing for 2 expansions. We don't know what's going to happen. And like, there's been a number of cases with Blood DK patches where the spec gets no changes whatsoever until 3 days before the next patch, where suddenly like the 15% armor nerf and the bone storm nerf in Uldir just happens, and you're like, hold on a moment, what just happened?
We need, as cringe as it sometimes happens with certain games, they need to do roadmaps for expansions, especially patch to patch. They need to lay it out and commit and actually succeed on what they commit to. If Windwalker is in a bad state, they say, right, okay, well, the roadmap is in 10.1, we are going to address Windwalker. We're going to look at it. We're going to have a deep dive and really like drill down and fix it. And then they need to actually do that. And if they do that, they only need to do it a couple of times, and everyone will forget the last year, 2 years of problems. It only takes one time for everyone to suddenly go, oh my God, holy shit, they're doing it. And they'll believe again that every time that they say that they're going to look at something, they will.
They will.
And that's all it takes. It's so simple to just, proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Just do it once and everyone will be on your side.
It made me so jealous, this league, looking at like PoE, when they gave them like a big post that was like, this is the problem we see. This is the solution. Here's the details of the solution. Just looking at that and thinking about how much better WoW communication would be if when we got communication with devs, it was like, this is the problem we see with Windwalker. This is what we're doing to fix it.
It's not just about problems either. Like, I keep thinking back to Shadows of Domination because I'm really worried about what happens in 9.2. Like, we know for sure the rune word is going away because that only works in Sanctum. But we have no idea whether the individual gems will work in the new raid.
Right.
That's gonna be fun, and we have no idea until the day of the raid coming out whether that's the case.
Tomorrow in testing.
Yeah,
hopefully, yeah.
Tomorrow's testing. Yeah.
Speak for yourself. I'm getting drunk.
Why not do both?
Yeah, but okay. Even if it's enabled in test, like how many cases has there been where something was enabled and then disabled 3 days before launch?
That's true.
Yeah. It's happened a couple of times.
The thing with a roadmap as well is that means that they can start gathering feedback before they even implement a change. If they say that, like, our problem with Windwalker that we're going, as the example, because obviously I'm not saying there's any issue with Windwalker, but we go, our problem with Windwalker going forward in 10.1 that we're going to address in 6 months or over the next 6 months is that we think that it's way too weighted toward AoE and it does too much AoE burst. And so the proposed changes we're going to scale back down some Chi-Ji and blah, blah, blah. And then someone can then feedback and say, I don't know whether or not that's the best idea. We could do this. And they can give feedback immediately to act on it in the iterative process rather than the impost of what you did was bad and we hate it and blah, blah, blah.
It also solves the whole, it was too late, so we're sticking with it, which happened to Azerite.
Yeah.
Because that was the biggest failure of Azerite. It got rolled out a month before beta ended, and there was no time to do anything. No time to give the feedback. Also, on top of that, it was borderline impossible to acquire on beta at the time.
Yeah, you had to do the quest lines to get it and hope you got the right traits and.
Yeah, and they it harmed everybody as well because of the fact that there was no vendor early on in BFA. You had to get it from your weekly chest.
Thank the Lord that has actually been improved over the last expansion and a half of them actually starting to put things back on the vendor so we can just test it straight out the gate and identify really crucial bugs. Because that is something that had like a really dark period from over Legion and early BFA. But like props that they started doing it and giving us everything.
So I guess that's a positive note we can end it off on. So yeah, I mean the PTR will have the tier sets there, and they actually made a post about it. Just closing it off with this, because you guys mentioned the how they can improve the communication. I don't know if it's just superficial, but I felt at least in the last month or so that there is some sort of improvement there. I can see much more forum posts from them, at least from the community managers. That whole thing with the community council, I don't know what's that about. I know some of you actually were in the private Discord with the devs and stuff and know exactly how that worked. Well, at least on the surface level, it looks like some things are getting better. We'll see. That being said, we can close it off.
I think this is a good point to wrap it up. It's been very, very cool getting all the insights, and I really hope we can get together for like a follow up. And by then we'll probably have a lot more to talk about 9.2, gauging by how they're already redesigning tier sets before they're even available on the PTR. Just makes me a little bit hopeful, a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, and also. I do like to stress out that you guys go check out if you're listening on Spotify, you can go on the YouTube and check the description of the video, to check out, Mandl, Wordup, Panthea, the tank notes, Guiltyas as well. The guys they write on Wowhead and Icy Veins and all of that, really cool folks. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a round 2 of this for even more breaking. But until then, thank you, boys.
Thank you very much.
They're having a blast on the chat over there. Thank you guys for joining, and thank you for listening or watching. Catch you next Monday with probably a spec podcast, right? It will be next
Monday. Yeah, definitely.
Next one. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello.
Bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classical retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.